ourselves, if you put your hand over your eyes, I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
Now your ears, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
Now you just cover your heart and extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
Today's spiritual truth is that awareness in itself is curative. Awareness in itself is curative. You know, that was actually penned by Fritz Perls, the famous psychoanalyst, but it could have been penned by Ernest Holmes, or Jesus, or Buddha, or Moses, or Muhammad, or Lao Tzu, because it's a basic spiritual belief. Awareness in itself is curative. In fact, that is why the leadership of this church calls ourselves the Center for Spiritual Awareness, because we believe that with greater awareness around our finances, around our relationships, around racism and homophobia and classism and sizeism and all of the other isms, if we can have greater awareness around each of those areas, we can cure the greatest disease on this planet, which is separation. It's the greatest disease. The awareness is not only true of global things, it's also true of some of our personal pain that we get ourselves involved in. Your blessing has your name on it, just as the song says. And your blessing is here today. But sometimes, to get to our blessing, we seem to need to go through a period of having our life fall apart so that we can build it back up to receive the blessing that we want. Well, I'm working a little series called The 10 Things to Do When Your Life Falls Apart, an emotional and spiritual handbook written by Daphne Rose Kingma. And I like this little book because it's giving us tools that we can know about now when perhaps our life isn't falling apart, so that we can have them in our spiritual kit bag for when our life does fall apart. You see, we make our solutions to the global issues and our personal issues so complicated. They're not complicated. And these are very simple. These things, these 10 things to do are very simple. They're not anything you don't already know about. It's just an affirmation that we need to keep them handy and actually do the work necessary to make them help us in our life. Last week we started out with the first one, which is you cannot get through your life falling apart until you learn how to cry your heart out. There's the shortest verse in the entire Bible is 2 words. Jesus wept. Why is it the only 2 words in that whole verse? Because nothing else is needed. He was just modeling for us what is necessary. No excuses are necessary. No explanations are necessary. It's just what is. Jesus wept. And you and I have to learn how to cry our heart out. And men, as I said last week, I'm especially talking to you because you've been taught not to cry. You have to learn how to cry your heart out. But we're going to move on today. You can get that on CD or online or somewhere else if you want. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. What I want to talk about today is the second and third one. And the second one is this. Become aware of your default settings. Become aware of your default settings. It's not saying do anything about it yet. Just become aware of it, because awareness is in itself curative. Become aware of your default settings. We all have them. It's what we do to cope when we don't know what else to do in our lives. You know, when your computer goes to a default setting, it's because you haven't programmed another specific setting into it. And that's what happens in our life. We just fall back into those coping mechanisms that we know because we're too scared to do something new, or we don't know what to do that's new in our lives. Default settings are habitual patterns, but they're not always the best way to cope in our life, especially when a new situation is out of control. That's when we need something different than what we've always done. We need to begin to bring into our life imaginative solutions that are going to help us in our life. Here's what she says on page 20 about this whole issue of defaults. In theory, there may be nothing wrong with your defaults. In the right circumstances, they can be great strategies. It's great to have a nose to the grindstone work ethic when you're working on a project that has to be finished in 3 days. It's wonderful to talk endlessly to your friends about the ever-unfolding tidal wave of issues in your romantic relationship, or to have a snack or a drink when devastating disappointment leaves you reeling. But if you always do this, or more importantly, if you only do this, especially when radically altered circumstances are crying out for different choices, you are living your life by default in your life. See, the problem with default is they're not tailored to any situation. They're just general defaults that we allow to keep us asleep to our situation. They might make us feel better in the moment, but they're not actually moving us forward in our life. They also allow us to go on automatic pilot. You're depressed? Run for the refrigerator. You lost your job? Well, there are 16 martinis out there for you to have in your life. You're brokenhearted? Then you go to blaming yourself or the other person in your brokenhearted situation. That is, all of that are default settings, and they're actually not helpful. When times are tough, you don't examine your default settings. So we need to learn how to do that before times get tough. See, because when we use the default settings, we're just putting a Band-Aid over something that's much deeper in our life. We're not actually getting to the issue. And conversely, when you face your default settings and you learn about them and you resist the temptation to use them, then you're signaling this to the universe. Okay, I'm ready for a new experience of life, and I'm ready for a new experience of who I am in this life. You're willing to connect on a deeper level with that divinity that is within you. And in that divinity that is within you, that's where you know where the solution is. Nobody needs to tell you. You already know that when you connect, when you take a moment. You don't do the same old thing. But here's the thing. You've got to be willing to step into the stillness. Step into the stillness to learn what new thing might be an option for you. You have to delay that automatic response to go into your default position. See, everybody has default positions. Mine is food. When I have a default position, it's easy for me to equate discomfort with hunger. And when I get those confused, I will go to, oh, I'm hungry. I'm not upset. I'm not in a place of I need to step back and ask God for a new option for these feelings here. I'm just going to stuff them down in my life. That's why there are many of us who really work at this default called food. And some of us work at it by saying, you know what, I'm only going to eat 3 meals a day with nothing in between. Because I know that the nothing in between is the call for me to go to my default setting. And so we even go as far to say, you know, when the Doritos, you go to the store and you feel a little discomfort in your life, and the Doritos are saying, Senorita, do you see me? Then we're able to call somebody on the phone right there and say, this is a default position. I'm not going to go there in my life. You know, and food is not only in the United States. It was interesting to read in this book that the manufacturers of toilet seats in Australia are making stronger toilet seats because of the 100 pounds on average Australians have put on in the last several years. So now they can withstand 100-pound more seating. That's interesting to me. It's also reflective of not only this nation is going to the refrigerator for default, but maybe other nations are going to the refrigerator for default. I don't know why that makes me feel any better. It does. Oh, you're as messed up as I am. But while food is the most common, it's not the only one. Here's what she says about defaults. Defaults come in many shapes and sizes, and it's important to recognize yours. They can be physical, such as eating, smoking, drinking, or getting stoned. They can be emotional, such as always taking the blame, putting everybody else's need ahead of yours, being the rescuer, always giving too much, blaming everyone else, or always calling for help without actually letting others help you. Your default could be compulsively saving money like a maniac and then being so cheap that you never get a moment's enjoyment out of life. Or conversely, it might be overspending in such grandiose and self-indulgent ways that you are always in debt. Perhaps your default is a workaholic, or indulging in internet madness, endlessly texting, web surfing, and blogging. It might be living in despair, being a cynic, or being an inappropriate optimist, like a loan officer in 2007. Maybe you're always looking and holding out for the perfect mate, or perhaps you always seem to choose the perfectly wrong person. You're the woman who dates the most complex, fascinating, artistic bad boy lover who hasn't got a cent. The list is endless. I don't know what yours is, but it's there. And I invite you this week to take a little time, proactively, and say, what is my default position? Because awareness in itself is curative. Once we can become aware of it, then the next time we're in a state of feeling overwhelmed, that's the time we might say, oh yeah, that's my default setting that I'm heading to right now. That was number 2. Number 2 is be aware of your default settings. Number 3 that I want to work with today is when your life falls apart, do something new. When your life falls apart, do something new. See, even when you're not in default crisis, it's good to get into the habit of doing new things in your life. See, every crisis you have is purposeful. Every single crisis you have in your life is purposeful for you. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not saying that the loan that the car that ran into you is your fault. I am not saying that you caused your type 2 diabetes. You may or may not have caused the car to run into you. You may or may not have caused the type 2 diabetes. You may or may not have caused that person who you loaned money to never speak to you again and you don't have your money. That may or may not be true, but it's not the point. It's not even, as Ernest Helms would say, it's not a valid question. What happened to you, the why of what happened to you is not a valid question. The only valid question is, what are you going to do about it right now? That's what we need to be looking at. And to understand that every crisis in our life is purposeful. It's the universe inviting us to have a different experience of our life and who we are in that life, in our life. You know, ease and grace and peace are comfortable states of being, and I actually am a big fan of ease and grace and peace. I think they're important in our spiritual journey, but they're not growth. They're not growth. They're rest. And rest is important on our spiritual journey. But if you want growth, look at all of the crises in your life and how you're handling them. Because that's where growth comes from in our life. Crises are very handy for getting us to move our soul into a different way of living. In order for us to do something new, she invites us in this book to look at it in 3 levels. She said there are 3 levels of doing something new: attitudinal, emotional and what we actually do in our life. See, as metaphysicians, we know it all starts in consciousness. It all starts in consciousness. If we were to begin to say, this isn't so complicated, every time that I feel critical, I'm going to move into outrageous praise. It's a learned behavior, but it can be learned. And it's something new to do when our life is falling apart. Every time I feel critical, I'm going to move into outrageous praise in my life. Every time I feel aggressive, I'm going to move into surrender in my life. It's learned. You can do it. It creates a new attitude. Every time you move into fear, you're going to be able to say, I move into faith in my life. They are learned behaviors. They won't come to us naturally. They did when we were babies, but now they're relearned. And you and I, can relearn them in our life. You and I know that what we put out comes back to us pressed down and multiplied. We don't even need to look at the Bible or any other sacred reading for that. You know that from looking carefully at your own life, that what you put out comes back to you pressed down and multiplied. And to prove this wisdom from Jesus, from Buddha, from Lao Tzu, from Ernest Holmes, to prove this wisdom, scientists are now measuring our body responses. And if we live in a state of positivity, if we live in a state of negativity, our bodies will show up the same thing. So in other words, if you're living in fear, in envy, in greed, if you're living in those states, your body becomes sluggish, and scientists can now prove that. It becomes sluggish, and we put out a vibration that is a lower vibration, and it will attract back to us that which we are putting out. If, on the other hand, we begin to live a more positive life, then our bodies act in a way that is a higher vibration, and we attract that back into our lives. Our consciousness begins to expand. What would this world be like if we just believed this for 1 week? If we just said, I don't really buy it, but okay, she asked me to do it 1 week. I'm going to try it 1 week. I'm going to try and live my life from this place of being positive in our life. What if for 1 week we could say, I believe in an unlimited universe? What if for 1 week we could say, I believe that we are all one. All human beings are one. What if for 1 week we could say there is no weapon formed against me? And I believe that so strong. Amen. And nothing can shake me from it, because I believe it that strong. Even though all the evidence out there that we're separate, but I'm not going to believe it. For this week, I'm going to believe we're all one. If we could do that, I believe we would stop the shooting of black men. I believe that. If we believe that, I believe that if we believe we were all one, I believe we could stop all terrorism attacks. If we really, really believe that, I think we could stop all the hateful rhetoric around politics that has come up. And this church could be ground zero for beginning to believe that in our lives. We can actually lift up those who are around us. See, we act like the solution is so complicated. It's not complicated. People say, oh, I don't know how to stop all the shooting. Oh, I don't know how to stop all the terrorist acts. Well, I know how to stop it, and you know how to stop it. It's begin to understand that there's only one of us, and that love is the answer. It's not that difficult to get. It's difficult to do, but it's not that difficult to get in our life. See, if we could get that, then maybe we could go to police departments, and we could actually have a diversity training that wasn't an hour and a half, when some people came and some people didn't, but that it would be a 12-week program in which people had to be there and they had to test out to get it in order. Maybe when we did that, we could weed out people who were unsuited for police work, because it's a very challenging job. Maybe we could begin to we could begin to make some real inroads in our life. But it's not just societal ills, it's all ills. It's our relationship with our families, with our beloveds, with our work situations. See, we could change if we could remember these 3 levels of change. Attitudinal, emotional, what it is we'll do. What would happen if we held ourselves accountable every night this week for changing in those 3 areas? Maybe each of us in this room this week could begin to see these outrageous shootings of black men by police. Maybe if for 1 week everybody in this room spent 5 minutes every day believing, trying to understand what life is like for a cop in this world, in these United States. This is not to excuse any behaviors. It is not to not hold accountable anybody for their behavior. But what if, for 1 week, we all tried to figure out what it's like to be a policeman in the United States? There is no separation. There is no separation, but we have to put the feet to this. I have a friend who is retired, recently retired, and she says she spends used to spend, when she retired, she had a leisure activity. And that leisure activity was spending time on Facebook, and she would spend between 2, 4, 6 hours on Facebook every single day. Now, it's a stretch for me to see this, but then when I think, you know what, I play golf for 4 hours as many days as I can possibly do it, so you know, I kind of calm myself down. But what she said after that was so interesting to me. She said, I used to spend my time on Facebook, but I had to stop because the political situation was getting so bad. I found myself putting on mean-spirited posts, and I don't want to be a mean-spirited person. So I had to do something new, and that was get off Facebook for a while. I thought that took courage. She's willing to really do something big, and I frankly loved her posts. I agreed with all of them. But in order to change, we have to do something new in this life and actually do it. What about emotional differences? What if for 1 week, just this week, you were willing to not put yourself down one time? Not once. That would be a spiritual practice for most of us. But if we were willing to do that, we would be doing something new. The 10 things to do when your life falls apart. Do something new in your life. And what about do? What about do? Are you willing to relocate if that's what it needs to happen, to do something new in your life? I don't mean take a geographic, because you know everywhere you go, there you are. But I mean to do something new, to get a promotion. Are you willing to go somewhere else? Or if you really hate your job and every day it's just sucking the life out of you, are you willing to quit that job? Not before you find a new one. But are you willing to say, I'm not going to stay in this job till either I get sick and have to go out on disability or somebody fires me. I'm going to be proactive. And I'm going to go out and start looking for a job right now because I'm willing to do something different in my life. These are not tough. Well, they're tough. They're not hard to understand. Our work is to be the spiritual warriors that we are and to put into practice these first 3 things to do. The first one, cry your heart out. The second one, become aware of your default settings. Go home tonight and make a list on your kitchen table. Just make a list. What are my default settings? Awareness is curative. And the third one is to begin to do new things in your life. Let's take this into prayer. Knowing that there's only one power, it's the power of love. Flowing through me right now, I don't have to do anything. I just have to get out of my own way and let it come. And let it flow. And let it touch the hearts of other people. For God can't do for me what God can't do through me. And so I just allow God to run through me. I give thanks for this. I give thanks for every single person in this church. I release this word into the law, and together we say, and so it is.